Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Skin is the Elastic Covering That Encases the Entire Body by Bjørn and translated by Martin Aitkin. This book was published by Two Lions Press, which focuses on translated works by new, overlooked, and underrepresented writers. This video is part of the Indie Press project, hosted by Stephanie over at Time to Read. This one is a really tricky one for me to review, partly because I've not really read many books that are like this. It was stream of consciousness and felt a lot like bringing together lots of memories of things, or kind of just vague scenes in a way. There wasn't really a clear storyline or anything like that, so the one book I suppose that I've read that feels the closest to this, and it wasn't really that close to it, but stylistically it felt a little bit like this, was Death is the Thing with Feathers. And the reason I say that they feel similar to me is just because that also felt very stream of consciousness, and it was prose poetry, and this book is written by a poet as well, and it is prose, but it definitely has that sort of mysterious feeling that I feel when I'm reading poetry, where I don't fully understand everything that's there. It feels like there's a lot that the writers, that they are saying, but not so overtly. And maybe that's not even true, like maybe it's just vague in ways where it's not even hiding anything at all, and there's nothing beneath the mystery of the text. But for me it felt like there was a lot there that I found kind of inaccessible in a way. I think if I'm honest about it though, this book wasn't really a good match for me personally. I think it probably needed a bit more directness to connect with me better, and I think it needed also to be less, maybe, I think it's going to make me sound really prudish when I say this, but less explicit all the time for what seemed like no apparent reason. And I feel like even saying that is not really fair on the book, because it wasn't that... Okay, I'm going to back up. In reading this book, I found that a lot of it felt very punchy and visceral, and like it was trying to make points by being very explicit. There is mention of an anus on just about every other page. There's mention of abuses of all sorts, and the book is predicated on the idea of exploring a fictionalized autobiography-ish text, I guess, where we're looking at Bjørn's first love, and this whole text is really full of loads of taboos. And when I say taboos, I don't mean quaint little, like, from two warring houses kind of taboos. It's not like, oh, this person is in an interracial relationship, how illicit, ooh. No, it's like incest and pedophilia and those kinds of things. So it's really, I think there are probably parts of the text that might be very difficult for some people to read. I found it, I guess, a little bit over the top. I didn't feel offended by it or anything, especially since Bjørn is the one who is looking back at his life where he was in a relationship with an older man. I don't know, it's there's a lot there that it doesn't to me feel voyeuristic. It feels like an exploration of something that is fraught with issues, and I think that the text makes that clear. It's not really glorifying the taboos in this. It's not really glorifying anything. It makes everything really feel sort of uncomfortable, I guess, is the idea, for the reader to not ever feel at peace with what's going on. I would say I didn't really get on particularly well with this book, and it's partly because I think I need a bit more structure in what I'm reading, or the non-structuredness of it needs to maybe justify itself a little bit more in a stronger way to me. That said, I still feel like I got a lot out of this, and I'm glad that I picked up a book that was so outside of my norm, because it made me really think about why it was written this way. One thing that I really liked about it was the way that gender fluidity was dealt with through the book, and I think that was aided by the stream of consciousness style, so I do see the use in it for that purpose. But I mean, that also made it more confusing, I think, for the reader probably. But then I think that confusion is useful, and it makes the reader really look at their preconceptions, which I think is great. Now, one thing that I didn't really love is the fact that I guess it felt like it was very focused on shocking you with mentions of genitalia and anuses and whatever, and I just didn't feel shocked by it. I just felt like it was a bit much to me. But then on the other hand, maybe you can say that fixation signals something else, or that fixation talks to a certain sexual preference, perhaps. I kind of don't feel like that's fair, and I don't know if I think that is helpful, I guess. I feel like that can lead to certain types of stereotyping, but I also felt like it was written from a place... I don't know if it was written from a place of authenticity. I hope that it was written from a place of authenticity, because otherwise it feels a little bit, I don't know, just shock for the sake of shocking. So, I don't know. Aside from the use of the body as a way to shock the reader, I feel like there were quotes dotted throughout every so often, not super common, but every so often, that I really liked about the commentary about the body. Things like, "The skin is a stage, as everyone knows. The skin is a stage where people express their inner worlds." And I think that's a really simple idea, but something about it I quite liked, where it's not just what people are wearing and like what you're dressed in and your makeup and things like that, but the skin itself being a stage. It's kind of, I mean, I guess because in the book there's mentions of bodily harm and things like that, the skin being used as a stage in that way was interesting to me. But the skin itself can have temporary and permanent marks for other reasons that can tell certain things about a person. All sorts of other things that people do to themselves or just are interpreted a certain way by society, that I think made that interesting to me. I mean, I don't have any conclusions from that, but I just liked that quote. Other little quotes like, "It's an immensely tiresome project trying to rid oneself of everything one is not," or the idea of coming to terms with having an infinite mind in a definite body. Those are the little bits and pieces that I quite liked. So obviously there's a lot of content about him, but I also felt like it's a strange kind of thing where this is him presenting himself to the reader and yet holding back so much. So it ends up feeling to me like, as the reader, you're being taunted with this thing that someone wants you to know but doesn't want you to know, and that kind of thing doesn't really work that well for me. But there were occasional moments of lucidity that I quite appreciated. Like, "Dear body, firstly, the ideal of you being in great shape and fully intact is cultural. It doesn't hold in any cultures at all times. It doesn't hold for circumcision. It doesn't hold for cranial deformation in ancient Egypt. It doesn't hold for the binding of women's feet in China, or for the piercing of the ear, nose, navel, and genitals, for example. The female Mercy of Ethiopia slit their lower lips and insert into them increasingly larger clay discs in order to make themselves more attractive for marriage. Some Central African tribes use rings to elongate the neck until eventually they are unable to bear the head without. Odin gave up an eye for wisdom. The Buddha gave flesh from his body to a hungry tiger. The religious flagellants of the 14th century mortified their flesh by whipping themselves. Tooth extraction, trepanation, self-infliction of wounds, and the mutilation of the genitals are societally sanctioned in numerous cultures. Religious people the world over penetrate their hands and feet in identification and solidarity with the sufferings of Jesus. In the late 19th century, reports flooded in of needle girls. Doctors would find hundreds of needles in their bodies, as well as glass shards and splinters, drawing pins, shoe nails. I feel like that kind of micro-documenting of the things that we do throughout the world to the body and the differences there and what is considered beautiful and not, or necessary or not, that kind of discussion was really interesting to me. It was probably the most interesting, alongside the gender fluidity train of thought that was in this book. The rest of it felt very obsessive about a certain situation, which I understand completely why you'd be that way about that situation, and felt very sad, but I didn't connect as much to what would be considered the main storyline, I guess. This book I felt like was just impossible for me to rate, so I didn't rate it, and I think that's partly because it's just really difficult to pin down, but at the same time I think that difficulty to pin it down and to categorize it or anything like that is the whole point of the book, that you can't categorize a lot of these things that he's trying to discuss. I would also say though, if you're looking for a book that you can read that has a beginning, middle and end, this just didn't feel like it had that to me, and I feel like for me I prefer some sort of structure, especially if you're dealing with something that is less conventional. That sometimes helps for connection and understanding of that thing, although like I said, I do understand why you might prefer to reflect the content in the style by not providing those things for the reader and putting them just in the deep end and just making them deal with that. I appreciate that, but after a while when I was reading this and I was coming towards the end, it didn't feel like I was coming towards the end because it didn't feel like I was going anywhere. It just felt kind of like, here's some content, and I was just reading that content, and then it didn't feel fully rounded at the end. It didn't feel like anything. It was just like I read a bunch of stuff. There was no through line that to me felt strong enough that it would possibly hold up when I look back at this, so I think that this will probably end up being a really forgettable book, but I think the reading experience was still valuable, and I'm glad that I did read it. And while I think that I'm very unlikely to pick up these kinds of books regularly in future, I think it's valuable to do every once in a while. I think it's worth giving both trigger and content warnings for all sorts of things. Basically, when this thing says that it's a treasure trove of taboos, it's true, it really is. There's mutilation, there's incest, there's pedophilia, there are loads of sexual taboos. There's a lot of stuff here that is very uncomfortable, and it's not trying to okay it all, it's just discussing that and discussing the experiences of one person. And I think it's interesting that one person would put their body through all of these things, and thinking about why they would do that. But I think that all makes it also very difficult content to read. So I don't know if I would recommend this to anyone, but if it sounds like something that's interesting to you and you do pick it up in future, I would definitely be interested in hearing what you have to say about it, because I feel like me coming to this is like a total noob coming to something that is way bigger than herself and just not knowing what to do with all of that content. So I think this is one that would be interesting for a discussion, but I don't know how to conduct that discussion. So if you have any opinions, if you've read the book already, please do definitely leave a comment. The publisher for August is going to be Verso, and I am so excited because I absolutely love Verso so much, and I already own a lot of their books, and I'm already halfway through the book that I chose for August. And if you want to join in, please do. It's a really great way to support indie publishers in this very difficult time, and if you can buy from your local bookshop online or something like that, please consider doing so way before supporting any billionaires who really don't need any more money to exploit more people. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!